In this video, we're going to look at using type in Adobe Illustrator. So I went ahead and selected the type tool over here on the side, which is represented as a capital T. And then there's two basic ways to create type. One is to click and just drag out a box, which this allows you to fill it with text. It fills automatically with lorem ipsum placeholder text, which you might be familiar with. It's been used in print for several centuries just to give you a sense of what a paragraph or something would look like. So I'm able to click and drag out a box in pretty much any size, and I can also go back to my arrow and then change the size of it, rearrange it, move it around, etc. So that's one way to do it. That's great if you're creating columns of text or something like that, but most of the time in Illustrator I find that I'm using individual lines of text, especially for things like logos, signs, etc. So the second way to create type is simply to take the type tool and just click once, which will give you just lorem ipsum. Now I can replace that type with something. Let me just use my name right now. And then go back to the arrow. I just always go back there in case I need to move things around, adjust something, etc. Type is pretty interesting in a software like Illustrator because there's usually multiple ways to do the same thing, like increasing the size of the type and different methods to do that with. So for example, when I chose the type tool, it rearranges all the elements up at the top so that it shows me the ability to change different typefaces, etc. Now if I'm just using the selection tool and I click off on the canvas, my top parameter bar goes back to normal. But if I choose the text, all those elements come back. So I can go in here and I can change the size of type, make it considerably larger. I can adjust the typeface itself. So maybe I go with something like Minion Pro bold condensed. I can alter its alignment, which even though it's by itself, you can still alter the alignment of those pieces. And I can change the opacity and of course the color, including providing a stroke around the outside edge, which almost always looks bad and I don't really recommend, except in very specific situations. More often than not, people should use solid text. Now, along with this, though, I can treat this very much like a shape. I can scale it using the selection tool by clicking and dragging on the corner and holding shift to ensure that it keeps proportion. One mistake that people very often make is that they don't keep it in proportion, and then when they resize it, they tend to warp the text in some way. Now, right now it seems to be a little stuck. Okay, there we go. You'll get text that's warped, and then that actually disrupts the unity, the design of the typeface itself. Looks really bad. People should not do it, but nonetheless it happens a lot. So I'll hit Command Z and bring that back. So whenever you're scaling text, you should go ahead and hold shift while resizing it to ensure that that doesn't happen. So next up here, you'll see, by the way, that this alters the size according to points. Points are related to inches, so because I'm using a pixel-based canvas, it actually doesn't make all that much difference what size we use. Typically, you just want text size to be consistent within itself. But the point system goes back to a connection to inches, etc. Now, there's a little button here that also says character, and this is very useful. This is great for manipulating type specifically, because I can go in here and say, adjust something like kerning. In this case, that would be to put the cursor right there between two individual letters, and then I would use that character panel to reduce the space between them or increase it, depending on what it needs, to go through and work the spacing specifically letter to letter. Now, I could also select all of that type by hitting Command A, and then use the character panel to increase the tracking, which is the space between all those letters together. Give it kind of a more dramatic look. You'll see this used a lot, especially in titles and logos. There's other elements to change in here. I'm not going to go into any great detail with it. Just know the character panel is there, and it gives you specific control over different elements and parameters within the type itself. Now we have to look towards something else. The fact that this is not really an object. It's still text. It can still be edited. So it's not really an object the way, say, a square or an ellipse or something else that I create with the shape tool would be. So we can convert it so that that becomes the case, because right now I can't use The eraser on this, I can't use it in the Pathfinder to cut through another piece of text. Occasionally you reach a point where you simply want the text to be an object so you can work with it like you do other objects in Illustrator. Also, you run into the problem of the fact that the typeface that I use up here, I might download something like Lobster. And this is something that I've downloaded just on this computer. It's not going to be available on another one should I take this Illustrator file and then open it somewhere else. The text is not automatically embedded. Now what you have to do then, if you want to create something that uses a unique typeface that's only on this one computer and move the file from one place to another like my students do when they submit things for projects, then the text has to be embedded, and you do that by going to the type menu at the top and selecting Create Outlines. What that does is it then converts the text to objects. It can no longer be edited. I can't change the kerning. I can't change the typeface or the size outside of just scaling it. I can still affect the color and I can still scale it using the selection tool, but that's it. So it's now limited. This is a step that you take once you have gotten far enough with the text that you're happy with it, except for those few parameters you can still change. Now right now all these letters move in tandem because they're connected to each other. Whenever you go through an automated process like creating outlines with text, Illustrator more than likely will group them together, assuming that you want them to stay together. So if I really wanted to, I could go up to the Object menu here and use Ungroup. And what that does is then each of these becomes a free-form selection that I can move around as I see fit. And I can adjust the text and play with it specifically. Also, this allows me to take something like the eraser and remove parts of a letter if I want to. I couldn't do that before this was converted. So I'm going to take this text and play with it a little bit to bring these closer together. I'm doing a sort of manual kerning now. Then I'll take all these pieces again and go back up to Object and group them back together. Now they again move in tandem. So one of the useful things about this is I could, say, create a banner of some kind here. We'll just create a rectangle. And I'm going to change the color so we can see it a little better. And then if I was to take this text group, which I can see over here in my layers palette, and put it above that rectangle, I can put it directly above, select them both, and use minus front to cut through it. Now see, it deletes out my text, but now I have a rectangle where the text is literally cut through it. You can see through to the background, as you can see when I pass that over the gray background. So text is extremely useful, but you have to understand the difference between working with it as type versus working with it as object, because each allows you to do different things with the text.